Hi, Dan. Good morning. Hi, Emily. Emil, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. And can you see my screen as well, the agenda?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we can.
Yeah, good.
You hear me now, do you?
Yeah, I can hear both of you. So maybe we can give 2-3 minutes more and then slowly start the meeting. And if you can add your name on the participants list, that would be good while we wait others to join. Then I actually have a question to you. I looked at CD Foundation YouTube channel, and the meeting we had, the previous meeting, is still not up there. And since we are starting the presentations from users and projects, I am wondering how much time it takes to get the meeting recordings uploaded to YouTube.
Hey, Fatih, I just heard your question. What was the question again?
Yeah, the recordings of the meetings, because we are starting this user project presentations. The first one is today, and it would be good to, you know, get them out YouTube so people can watch them on their time.
Oh, you know what? I have to, I'm signed in, which is great. My test this morning, by the way, was to log in as a different user, which I have done, and it worked like a champ. So let me log out and start the recording really quick.
Okay.
It looks like that did not start for some reason, but let me log out and I'll log back in.
Yeah.
Good morning, Fatih. I'm wondering where the link that for the document you're looking at right now is. Was that sent out?
Yeah, it's actually, I put the link on the Zoom group chat as well. If you, you are on the computer, you should be able to, click that.
I see it. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And we have a caller from the phone. I don't know who that person is. I can add the person to the participant list.
That's Jeremy.
Oh, Jeremy. Okay, let me add you.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So I suppose we can start slowly, because the first few points are basically what we discussed last week. And then the main topic I want to bring up is the work we started doing with the common vocabulary and terminology, followed by the presentation from Emil with regards to Eiffel. So welcome everyone again, and it's great to see all of you here. As usual, you know, when you have meetings and when you have action points, they are generally left to the later parts of the meeting, but this time I want to have the action items reviewed first, so we don't forget about action items and we follow those. So let's look at the action items from last week. So the first action item is basically, you know, we are using mail list and Slack for communication, and that was the ask from everyone to join the mail list and Slack channel, because we are sending all the updates and notifications and meeting agenda and meeting minutes to mail list. And currently, I think there are 20 people signed up to the list. So if any of you haven't signed up yet, please sign up to mail list and join the Slack channel, so you get notified about what's happening there, and that I can perhaps mark as done. And the next two action items were about the governance discussion we had last week, and those action items on me, basically just sending the information about what's happening with the governance topic and starting the co-chair nominations, which I did. I think it's Monday, which I will touch in the next point in the agenda. And then based on the agreement we had last week, all the current members listed in the README file are added to SIG Interoperability GitHub repo as maintainers. What this means is that those people will get notifications automatically when a new pull request is open for the repo, and they will have approval permissions and so on. So it's basically helping out with the review process and submitting incoming pull requests. That is done as well. And then Tracy helped us to reach out to eBay. It is great seeing you, Ramin, here. Thank you for joining. So basically, we mark her action item done as well. So those were the action items we had from last week. And then we can go back to the original agenda. So basically, last week what we discussed was the question was like CDF Continuous Delivery Foundation doesn't have a clear guidance when it comes to how special interest groups are governed. Obviously, this gives us a lot of freedom, but at the same time, it makes it difficult for anyone who is joining to Continuous Delivery Foundation or working in groups like special interest groups or working groups. It might be difficult for those people to understand how these groups are run, because they are kind of different from projects. And that's the point we brought up to top technical oversight committee's attention last week, Tuesday. And TOC will work on a simple framework when it comes to SIG governance, and that will become available coming weeks. So we will not need to come up with our own governance, but we'll use whatever comes out from TOC, because special interest groups are overseen by the technical oversight committee, and we are bound to those processes and those rules. And the second related topic about the governance was that currently I am the only chair in the SIG, but the general practice within CDF and within other committees such as CNCF, SIGs are generally governed by 3 people, 3 co-chairs. And one of the reasons of having multiple co-chairs is to enable the representation of different views and bring different perspectives to how the SIG is run and what the SIG is working on with. And based on those conversations, Monday, with this mail I am showing on the screen right now, we started the nominations for co-chairs. And the idea with this is basically finding 2 more individuals to help out with running the SIG, and one of the people could be representing projects and the other people could be representing users, so we have equal representation within the SIG, taking us to 3 co-chairs. And during last week's meeting, Christy from Tecton and Watson from CNCF Cross CI were nominated by others. And Christy, I see you joined as well. Thanks for accepting the nomination. And we need Watson to accept his nomination as well. And we will wait for other nominations until 10th of February. So and if other people step up and nominate themselves, we need to go to an election. But if there is no other person nominating for the co-chair position, I think we will have ourselves 3 co-chairs in the end by middle of next week. So any comments, questions about the governance or co-chair topics?
Yeah, I just posted in the chat that the intent for not having a strict charter manifest to start, it's instantiated through this process. So if you look at the example I put in the chat from CNCF, that's I think I put the one for security, but it's very similar, reads very similar to what a SIG is, what our motivation is for making one, what's in scope, what's out of scope, and the charter. And the charter cannot violate the TOC's charter. It must be augmentative or additive to that charter. And that charter should be referenced even in some of our SIG formations. So if you take a look, so take a look at that list of SIGs. That we have a similar process. It's almost 1 for 1. But when you form a SIG, you don't necessarily have to have a charter, but we've already defined our mission and goals. The only thing that's missing in ours is a direct line of sight of forming a governance. And we have the members who are going to be the stewards of the SIG, but you can reference, hey, this is defined in the charter of the TOC to do these things, or you're going to define a charter and say we are empowered by this part of the TOC's charter, if at all. Yeah. But I wouldn't go too far down in creating a whole new charter that's different than already that we have listed for the SIG. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, thanks for passing the security SIG charter from CNCF. But actually, I referred to CNCF TOC SIG charter because, like, again, CNCF SIGs have their own charters, but at the top level, TOC has a charter where all the SIGs can refer to and add some other points that is not in conflict with the TOC charter. That was the missing thing I noticed when I was looking. CDF doesn't have anything like this. And that was the question, should we have one? If not, can we come up with something by referring to something else?
Yeah, so you are right. I think the only thing that we have started was this. And I think that we're at a point for adding verbiage.
Yeah.
And I can actually, and that is something that I can do, is get something that reads well and then have everyone vote at the TOC and SIG level. And I'll post it to the TOC.
I think Tara Hernandez took an action point from during last week's talk meeting. And just to clarify, like, we are not after something very heavy, but it's just important to, to tell the people who are not, into how the SIGs are run, and they know how these things are run. So they know how they can contribute, how they can join, and like code of conduct, that type of like very basic stuff. It's not, it doesn't have to be heavy, and it shouldn't be heavy either.
Sure.
Yeah. So thanks then sharing those links. I can put the link there as well. Christy, would you like to say something since you are one of the nominees?
Sure. Before I say anything about that, I did have a question about what we were just talking about. I think there was a brief mention of like the goals and the mission of the SIG. And I was wondering if since I wasn't at the last meeting, if that is something that we have established already or something that we would be establishing. My guess is that it's something that we would be establishing going forward after we have co-chairs, or what is the plan around that?
Yeah, I think that was one of the discussions last week. We didn't go into too much details. By the way, please speak up, everyone. I don't want to speak alone here. And one of the first questions we start talking about was like, I think it would be good to describe what interoperability means in CI/CD context. Because if you talk to different people, you hear different ideas from their point of view. Some people say pipeline standardization, the other people say like, this event-driven approach to CI/CD and so on. I think if we can come up with some high-level description of what it means for us, then we can start crafting some kind of goals, vision, roadmap, like of stuff. So we haven't reached to there, but it should be one of the things, very first things we need to do.
Hi, this is Tracy. I was going to add, like I really like in the MLOps working group, they've got kind of an initial roadmap, and then the plan is to refine that, maybe even take the first full year to sort of say, what are the different areas, how are we going to tackle them, and what are the kind of, best guesstimate kind of timescales. So I'd love for the interoperability one to just divide up the different topics and kind of map them out. Whether is interoperability about, highlighting the topic globally? Is it about pulling tools together and just capture all the different types of angles to it?
That makes sense to me. I guess it's hard to solve any problem until you know what the problem is that you're solving. So that seems like a pretty reasonable approach.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess just to say something about the co-chair nominations and elections. Thank you, Tracy, for mentioning me last time in the meeting that I wasn't able to attend. I'm pretty passionate about interoperability. If you are familiar at all with the Tecton project, one of our goals is to try to help with reducing fragmentation in the CI/CD space. So this is very relevant to my interests, and I think this is also one of the coolest things that the CDF could do, bringing together all the people who work on CI/CD together. Yeah, I'm excited.
Thanks, Christy, and thanks for accepting. Thanks, Tracy, for nominating Christy, because it is a very important area, obviously, and we need your experiences since you already have, I think during last week's FOSDEM, Tracy, you mentioned Tekton is working on, Tekton already has some kind of specification for pipeline. I don't remember exactly what it is. So it's really valuable to bring those things here so people can look at them and continue working on those things collaboratively. So I think that's enough for governance, and we will continue like how we started and see what happens on talk level, and then we will adapt going forward. And by next week, hopefully we will have the co-chair seats filled. So the next topic is Continuous Delivery Summit Europe, and that is happening as Day 0 event to KubeCon Europe, and call for proposals closes tomorrow. So if any of you are interested to, submit a talk proposal, you have 1 day left. And then I think, Christy, you know the timeline better than me. You can perhaps say a few words about how the process will work and when the notification will be sent and how the summit is planned.
Sure. Let me just pull up a doc so I can give you the correct dates. So like you said, the CFP closes on Friday. And then next week, what will be happening is that we'll be sending out all of the CFPs to all the folks who volunteered to be on the program committee for review. And then myself and I'm co-chairing the CD Summit with Rosalind from Armory, which is a company that works on Spinnaker. We'll be going through all of the reviewed proposals and putting together the final schedule. And we'll be sending out notifications to let people know if their talks were accepted on the 17th, which is a Monday, and that should be the same day that the schedule is released. Yeah, and then also recently registration opened for the CD Summit. It wasn't available through KubeCon registration for a while, but it is now. So that's another thing to highlight. I get, even if you're not interested in proposing a talk, if you just want to attend it, please register. And yeah, that's about it. Well, we have a preference for lightning talks also. So if you feel like you'd be interested in talking about something, but not sure if you want to do an entire talk, that's actually perfect, because we really like lightning talks, and we're going to try to have lots of slots available for those.
Yeah, please submit, people, and then we get your ideas presented there, and you can meet with everyone who is interested in this area there on site Monday, March 30th, Amsterdam. So hope to see most of you, all of you there, hopefully. So that's CD Summit. And the next topic, perhaps this is one of the topics brought up by Jeremy last week during the first SIG meeting, is perhaps even before we start talk about what we are going to and how we are going to address the challenges we all face, it might make sense to start working on a common vocabulary terminology, because what some say when it comes to pipeline might not mean the same thing for the others. And that work actually started last week, and there is a pull request on GitHub in SIG Interoperability repository. Basically, what is there right now is the terms used by different tools and listed there, and basically creating a simple mapping between those tools. If you look at, if I can show the file, yeah. If you look at the file, you will see some of the CI/CD tools and technologies there, and I am sure we miss many, and I think Emil mentioned Argo is not there. So please review the pull request, comment on it, and you can even amend the pull request and add your contribution there directly. So all of these tools, if you look at Tekton, for example, under Tekton, different terms used by Tekton is listed there, and similar with Tuzul. And we also have Gerrit, GitHub, and GitLab listed there. And at the end, it's a simple mapping. And this probably is not entirely correct, because I personally am not very, into all these different tools and technologies. So please look at this, share your thoughts, and then if we can finish the work with this vocabulary, even this is a contribution to CI/CD ecosystem, it will make others' lives easier when they look at different tools and try to see what are the difference between them on very high level.
Yeah, I think this is great, especially this mapping. I haven't had a chance to kind of dive into it deeply, but I certainly plan to, and I'll be happy to take it to various folks and just get their perspective. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of objections to putting things in boxes and making one-to-one comparisons, but I think it's really good to have these conversations and just build some awareness that, you know, a job in one thing isn't automatically a job in another thing. So yeah, this is pretty important.
So that was the last point in the agenda. And yeah, again, please look at this, and this is perhaps the very first thing we start doing. And if, as Christy mentioned, if we can start working on some kind of goals and take an example from MLOps and employ similar approach for interoperability as well, that would be great. And if you are up to it, just send a pull request and we start working on it together. It doesn't have to be an action item, you know, just go there, send a pull request, and we get that work started as well. So anyone else wants to add something to this topic, vocabulary, terminology, or any other topic you want to bring up before we move on to first user presentation?
As we are getting closer to getting out in front of either just internal CDF at large or external presentations, I did cook up a presentation template, posted it here, put it in the chat. So feel free to grab that and use it for presentations for the interoperability sake.
Thanks for that. Let me add that. Thanks, Dan. Okay, then I take this as no other topic for the moment. And yeah, this is not the only way to bring up new topics. Obviously, we have mail list as well. Just share your thoughts on mail list and perhaps direct go to the agenda and add new topics for upcoming meetings if you want to have certain topic discussed during those meetings. Just feel free to do that. And then we move to Emil. Are you ready, Emil? I can stop sharing.
I guess I am.
Okay. Yeah.
Should I start sharing?
Yes.
Let me see if I do that now. Share screen. And there we go. Do you see my sharing?
Yes.
Very well. Okay, so thank you for having me. I will mention what we have been working with within Ericsson for quite some years, and it's a framework, or rather event protocol, that we call EIFL, and it's an event protocol for CI/CD pipelines. So first, some background questions that I would like to look into in this presentation. So one question you might have when talking about CI/CD pipelines is, how can we communicate about new artifacts becoming available within a pipeline to the ones who are interested in seeing those artifacts? And how can we reach out to others to trigger their pipelines, or at least inform them that there is something new, and others that might have different platform or tools to run their CI/CD on. And how can we also know that someone is starting to test our product that we have delivered and published somewhere? And how can we know if such a test is successful? And also, how can we visualize our connected pipelines? Then pipelines that could run on, again, on different tools or different technology stacks underneath. And furthermore, how can we also trace our delivered products all the way back to the source code changes that were made in the beginning to before they were built, and also across different pipeline tools. So this is about having different pipeline tools in your network of pipelines, and how can you make sure that they can communicate and that the information sent is understood by an external listener. I won't spend a lot more on the background of Eiffel. The journey within Ericsson on Eiffel was presented when I was in San Diego in November, I believe it was, presenting, and the link is there. Eiffel was also presented on FOSDEM this weekend by Emily Pettersson from Ericsson, who is also on this call, and also by a guy called Fredrik Fristedt from Axis Communications. There was a presentation from both these companies around Eiffel and how Eiffel has helped both Ericsson and Axis to handle their pipelines. Also, there is actually a book on this. The concept of the ideas behind Eiffel has been discussed a lot, or at least, yeah, it has been discussed in academia. There are links in the last slide of this presentation. I won't read them out, but you can have them in the presentation deck afterwards. And there's also one printed book actually that handles these matters that I would invite you to actually look into. So going in directly to Eiffel then, one of the main principles, or actually the main principle I believe that Eiffel is concerned about is that you need to, it's up to you what you want to communicate from your pipeline. But when you do communicate something, you need to follow a certain pattern or protocol so that the listeners can understand you. Then again, it could be very well to have dialects of your language. We know all of us that, I mean, in this call, we all speak English, but we have different dialects, of course. We can still understand each other, and that's fine, as long as we speak the same language, as long as they don't diverge too much. So what you communicate is up to you, but how you do it is not. That's the main principle of Eiffel. Eiffel is then a protocol with events, and the events are structured as JSON objects. And what you see now on the screen is the main format of these events. So there are three sections: the meta section, the data section, and the links section. I will come back to the data and links section later, but the meta section is then, of course, meta information, and there we have an ID of each event sent. We have a type of event, which states what type of event or action has been going on in your pipeline. There's a version that is specific to the event type, and there's then also a timestamp, so you can track when things have happened. So this is the main structure of one Eiffel event. There are also different event families defined in Eiffel, handling different areas of your pipeline. So there is one family handling the artifacts that are created or tested, or created or composed. And then there are test-related artifacts, test-related events, and there are also source code related events. And we also have activity-related events. And I must say now that activity is maybe a new term here. We've talked about in this terminology discussion just earlier that there are, I mean, we have the pipeline is one thing, and then we have the stages or steps or jobs or whatever we call them. But to Eiffel, all those different things are actually activities. So even a whole pipeline could be one activity, or a stage or a step or a job or whatever you call it. All those are activities to Eiffel. And there could be a hierarchy of activities. So for example, within one pipeline activity, you can have a lot of step activities or stage activities or whatever you call them. So pipeline does not, Eiffel does not say anything about the concept of a pipeline or stage or step or job actually, but instead all those things are called activities within Eiffel. That is how it's structured right now, at least. So if we look into these events, then we dig quite deep technically directly. This is the first event I'll show you here. It's called Artifact Created Event. I will refer to these events later on with the abbreviations in the presentation. So I will spell them out probably, but I will not show the interpretation of them in the slides everywhere, because that won't fit. So this is an artifact created event, and one of the important parts of this event is then within the data section, where you can specify an identity for your artifact that has been created or built. And in the Eiffel standard, the identity is supposed to be something of package URL format, Perl format. So we have adopted the Perl spec to state what the identity of a created artifact is. For those of you who don't know Perl, it contains, has a package section, and then it has a section of the product identity, so to say, generally, and then it has a version, and then you can append even more extra information on the end of this string, the identity. Then after you have built an artifact, you might want to publish it somewhere. You see this artifact created event, at least in the picture I show now, does not have any information about where it is stored or anything. So, sorry, I'll come back to that. First, let me talk about the confidence level modified event. So there is an event saying that an artifact has reached a certain confidence level. And that means that it has been tested in some sense. You can now tell the world that this artifact has reached some certain maturity level or confidence level, as we call it here. And within this confidence level modified event, there is a data body again, then a data object, which contains a name, a free text string name, and then the value of the confidence level. So this is how we can define confidence levels. It's very free still, but it's at least, it has these name and value fields. Then the first time now I show you this link section in the event as well. And that's a very important thing to Eiffel, because we don't want to duplicate data within multiple events. So we don't want to repeat what we have said previously. So when we send this confidence level modified event, we don't repeat the ID of the artifact that we have created or tested. Instead, we reference the event that contains that data. And we also have link types on each of these links. So in this case, there is a subject link saying that the subject for this confidence level that has been reached is then the artifact pointed out by this first artifact created event. So that's how events are linked together and how information can be collected by listening to multiple events and aggregating information from them. And then to the published event that I was about to talk about earlier. So now when we have reached a certain confidence level, it could be wise to also publish this event so that others can see it. And then we create a artifact published event. We link to the artifact created event again with an artifact link in this case. And within this event, you can see that there's a data object containing the locations sub-object. And here you can specify to where you have uploaded this specific artifact so that listeners can download it and test it or include it in their builds or whatever. Maybe before I go on, is this understandable? Do you have any questions so far before I look into more event families?
Makes sense to me.
Great. So let me go on then to the next family. Let me look into some of the test related events. There are a lot more events than I will show here, but just for you to get some feeling of what it is. So We have, for example, something that we call a test suite started event, which informs the listener that now we have started to execute a certain test suite. This event doesn't contain very much. It's more or less the name of the test suite that has been started. And later on, there can come a test suite finished event when you have finished testing your thing. The test suite finished event will also include a outcome object stating if it was successful or not executing this test suite, and also a link to a URI link to the persistent logs from this test suite execution. So you can look into more details of the outcome if you're interested. And again, they are linked together. So the test suite finished event links to the test suite started event by this test suite execution type link. Yeah, there are more test related events, but I won't go into those now. I will instead jump to the source code related events. Here we have something called.
Can you go back one screen real quick? I just want to make sure.
Yes, sure.
So the link, let's see, the test suite finished is linking back to the started.
Yes.
And the name of that link is test suite execution?
Yes, that's the type of link.
The type of, okay, got it.
Link.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Good. So for the source code related events, there is first a source change created event, which states that now I have created a new source change. For example, you have pushed something to Gerrit, or you have created a pull request in GitHub or GitLab, a merge request. And this event then contains something that we call a change, that is a source change, and a description of what that is. So more details, of course, of this needs to be read in the protocol spec. This is an example where we have a Git identifier. It could be some other source control system. It could be Mercurial or ClearCase or Sven, actually, we have support for as well in the protocol. So here you state the commit ID, for example, of your source change, and also reference to the actual change. If it would be in Gerrit, it would be a change ID reference. If it would be GitHub, it would be a pull request reference. And later on, you might want to merge this Gerrit change or merge the pull request in GitHub. And when that is done, you can, if you want, send a source change submitted event, pointing again to the source change created event by a change type link in this case. Actually, you if it is a merge change, or sorry, a merge commit in this merge, then you need to specify a new Git identifier, because that merge commit ID will not be available as a source change created event. So there you would need to repeat actually the Git identifier field, but with a new commit ID in it. But again, linking them together makes it possible to track how, for example, the duration between these two actions in the pipeline, and follow what else has happened. It doesn't make very much sense now with only these two events, but I will combine them later on, and you can see what gains that will give. Also, the third event in the source code related events is the composition defined event that can be seen as a baseline if you wish. And the baseline name or composition then contains one or multiple links to different source changes. So if you, for example, have commits in 3 different repositories, and you want to state that now I have built the baseline of these 3 different commits from different repositories, you can then send a composition defined event saying that I have these 3 different elements in my composition, and all those are then notified by element type links from this composition defined event. This actually has a name on it as well, name property in the data field, data object. But the most important to mention here is then that we link to, instead of again stating the source change commit ID or whatever, we instead link to the previously sent event for the source change submitted. Yeah, and it could be multiple, yeah. So there can be multiple elements here as well, pointing to other source changes. Yeah, and then about these activity-related events, which could then reference pipelines or stages or steps or jobs in your pipeline. There are 3 different activity-related events, mainly. First is the activity triggered event, which more or less says that now I've put this activity in the queue to be executed. If you would relate it to a normal Jenkins execution, it would be that the job has been put in the Jenkins job queue or the build queue. Then this artifact triggered event, activity triggered event could be sent. It will just contain a name of the activity and not much more. Of course, in the case of Jenkins, it could be a job name as well within it. So there are multiple more optional data fields possible to use here. Then as soon as the activity starts to be executed, or the job in Jenkins, if you wish, starts to be executed, you would send the activity started event, pointing to the triggered event again through this time an activity execution type link. And you will also then specify the URI to the specific build or whatever you want to call it in your activity. So you can follow the progress of this activity execution. And once it's done, you can send an activity finished event, again pointing to the same activity through the activity triggered event. And here you can then state the outcome of the activity and any persistent logs that you want to notify the listener about. And that's it about activity related events. And then if we now try to combine these events a bit. In this picture, in the lower section, you see a fictive pipeline. First you merge some code and then you build it and you test it and you deliver it. It's very simple and straightforward pipeline. Time flows from left to right, as in the earlier pictures. I call it upstream if I go to the left and downstream if I go to the right, just to make the terminology clear. So first here we see a source change submitted event, meaning that the source change has been merged in your source control management system. That could then trigger an activity to be started, this build activity in this case. So if you in your pipeline, either if you're actively polling your source control system, or if you are being called by a webhook, regardless how you have started your pipeline, you could send this activity triggered event and saying that now I have got this activity in my queue. It was caused by this source change submitted event. So that's why we have a cause link in this case. And then suddenly the activity actually starts. If it's a build, for example, then it will link to the activity triggered by the activity execution link type. Then we could probably send a composition defined event saying that, okay, I want to build something and this is the composition or the baseline that I intend to build from. So again, this element link can point to the source change submitted that I want to build from. And I can also reference the activity triggered to say that someone listening to this composition defined event can understand that I do this composition within this activity that is within the build activity in this case. And then after that, I probably build the artifact and I send an artifact created event pointing out the composition with the composition element type, link type. And when that is done, I can send the activity finished event, again pointed into the activity triggered, stating that now I've done this build activity and then it's up to the next step in the pipeline to continue. And in this case, the test stage was triggered by the finishing of the build activity. So therefore the cause link goes that way. I will go quickly through this now. I have a test stage and this will test suite execution for this test. I send in a conference level modified event when I finished all my tests, and the conference level modified event again points back to the artifact created event to state that this is a specific artifact that I've tested and it has now reached a new certain conference level. And when that is done, I can finish my activity, send in the activity finished event, meaning that now the test activity is done. And then we can see another way of triggering the next step. In this case, I intentionally did not trigger the delivery step from the activity finished event as I did in the previous step, but instead triggering it from the conference level modified event, which means that some listener to this test or to the conference level modified event could trigger some other activity that is not really connected to the original pipeline, but instead just triggered because some artifact has reached a new conference level. So you are free to state the cause of your activity in whatever way you like. And this is how that can be different for different kinds of pipeline executions. And in the activity delivered, we start the activity and we then publish that same artifact and we send the finished event. Yeah, and that's this. Is this also understandable and clear, or do you have any good questions on this one before I move on? No questions? So another example then of combined events could look like this. Here I don't have any activity events because it will be a very messy picture. But in the middle here, you see a composition defined event. It is this baseline event saying that I intend to include a lot of things in my new baseline, or in my new artifact. And to the left of this baseline, you see 3 different chains of events, or 3 different sub pipelines, so if you wish. So this states actually that there are 3 different artifacts coming into this composition. So in this case, we don't build from source code, but instead we create the baseline out of binaries of artifacts created previously. So it's more like an integration, if you wish, of already built binaries. And that integration could then result in a new binary or some kind of artifact. It doesn't need to be a binary. It could be just it could be a tar file or whatever, this artifact that you create, but some kind of integration of the previously built binaries. And in this example, then I show that we have 3 parallel test activities running. Actually here I don't have test suite, but instead test case triggered. So they are other tests related events. So these events are test case triggered, test case started, and test case finished events. And here I just with an example show 3 different test cases running in parallel. And then when those 3 test cases have been run successfully, we send an artifact published saying that, okay, now we want to publish this artifact that has been created. So this could, for example, be an integration of different existing tools out there. And in this case, I just exemplify with, this could be the Tecton pipeline, for example, where you build your Tecton binary or Tecton delivery. And you have some artifact coming in and you create a composition, and then you state that I have done these tests on my artifact, and then I publish it. And it could also then be that the other part coming into this composition comes from Kubernetes. It could, for example, I guess, be the CRD library from Kubernetes that I believe Tecton is dependent on. So when there is a new delivery from Kubernetes, the Kubernetes community, on the CRD library or whatever it's called, then Tecton could listen to that and could link it into its own baseline. And then the third thing here could maybe be some OpenSSL or whatever. I don't know what the dependencies in Tecton are, but just to exemplify that this could then be 3 different open source communities communicating with each other this way, if they would have events in them. Then I have no idea if this is correct, probably, most probably not, but just to exemplify that these could then run on different technology stacks, different tool chains. So I believe that Tecton itself uses Tecton CD to deliver itself. And I don't know, maybe Kubernetes uses Circle CI to deliver, to build its Travis pipeline, and maybe OpenSSL uses Travis CI, for example. regardless, if all of these would have support for the same event protocol, they could communicate in this way, and they don't need to stay on all on the same toolchain to be able to communicate. That's the message with that one. And this graph of events, then it's a directed acyclic graph, so it's not circular, and it's deterministic. If you, for example, would look at this composition defined event, you could perform an upstream query on that event, and then you would get all the artifacts that are built in that baseline. So with a simple upstream query, you will have a deterministic result stating all the artifacts in your composition. And the same way, if you do a downstream query from this composition defined event, you will eventually find all test results for this this composition, the artifact that you have created actually.
Can I ask a quick question? That's probably pretty naive, but where are the events actually like being queried from? Is it from some like central location that they're all being published to, or how does that work?
Good question. So as we use it, I mean, the Eiffel protocol itself doesn't state any directions on how events should be stored, or even if they should be stored. But obviously, if you want to query these historically afterwards, you need to store them somewhere. And then you could have a database where you just listen to this message bus or whatever, where you send the events. You can have a database that stores them. And of course, then you would need to federate the messages between these different communities pipelines. So if you, for example, would have a message bus in Kubernetes, in a Kubernetes community where they send their own events, and then you have one in Tekton, you need to set up a federation, of course, between those message buses. And if you wish, you can store the Kubernetes events yourselves in your own database, or maybe Kubernetes has its own database, event database, where you can query from. So that's up to the users of this protocol. And obviously, as we've used this quite extensively within Ericsson so far, we have a lot of ecosystem tools, as we prefer to call them, surrounding Eiffel. So we have an event database that we use internally. We have things to visualize these events, and we have things to send and receive the events as well. Yeah. Any more questions? I think I have something else on this. Yeah. Okay, as I said, we can use this data then in the events for visualizing and creating measurements and a lot more things when we have these time-stamped events that are linked. Any more questions on this picture?
So just so I'm clear, you can go back, yeah. All of the references to any of these events, they're all kind of from children to parent, if I can use that term.
Yes.
It's never the other way around. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Children to parent, or maybe you should say from downstream to upstream.
Downstream to upstream. There you go. That's okay. I see. Okay. Thanks.
I see we don't have too many minutes left, so I might rush the last parts. This I've already talked about, the use cases where Eiffel can be used. Well, I will go into this actually a bit, I see now, yeah. So if you would, I mentioned briefly that we have something that we, some visualization of these events internally, and that's something that we currently call Follow My Commit, where you can actually have your pipeline as you see it in the top here. And with the events sent, in this case, I send a source change created, some activity events and test suite events and other activity events. I can see that currently when this snapshot is taken, there has been an activity started event sent for my build activity, which means that I can visualize now that the build activity is ongoing with this blue color. The unit test is already finished and it was successful. So you can quite easily create a complete pipeline image as this with these events and get the status of them to visualize this way. And that's quite heavily used within our own pipelines. Also, measurements, as I briefly mentioned before, you can, for example, these are just examples, and you can easily calculate the duration of your so-called pre-merge pipeline, as we used to call it, where you push some commit to GitHub or Gerrit or whatever, and then until you have reached the end of this pipeline, you can do such measurements and see how it evolves over time. And similar then for the post-merge pipelines that you create. You can, for example, create calculations on your build result frequency. How often does a build succeed? How often does it fail, and so on. And just exemplifying again, test activity duration. How long does it take to execute this test in my pipeline? And does it increase or decrease over time? And all this with the same protocol, with one language to specify all these actions, activities.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Yes.
So I understand this is, you've been going through pure protocol here. There is no talk of implementation, which is fine. There is a definition that's very important. May I ask what exactly, what is the actual implementation that you folks used at Ericsson for this? For example, what message was it Kafka? What is the event store that you used? Is it Elasticsearch? What did you actually use?
Yeah, so for message propagation, we actually use RabbitMQ.
RabbitMQ, okay.
So it's an MQ implementation there. That's our message bus implementation with federation between a lot of different RabbitMQ hosts. And then for storing the events, we currently use MongoDB to store them. But we also have an Elasticsearch interface on top of that MongoDB, so we can query the database with Elasticsearch queries if we like. Yeah, so that's about it. And then we have quite extensive support in Jenkins for both triggering on events and sending events. These activity events are actually sent implicitly. You don't need to specify them yourself when you define your flow, but instead of just when you just specify create a job with a specific type, then you will get those events for free. So it will link all the activity events for you in the background. So that's quite heavily used as well. And now we're looking to using Jenkins pipeline, and we're interested to try out Tekton as well, and we use Argo to some extent as well. So we have some different pipeline engines, but as you know now, the protocol is agnostic to underlying architecture. I don't think I have much more time, so yeah, repeating.
Do you have a link to this presentation?
I can send it out afterwards.
That would really be great. And this is something that I'm sure Christy can sound off on this as well. There's a couple of different efforts going on within Tekton that is definitely in the same wheelhouse as what you just defined. In fact, Antonio Fratelli started a document which I started to contribute to. He calls that the it was a proposal, Tekton notification proposal, which has a lot of overlapping areas to this. And we both, me and Andrea, probably need to take a look at this and see what we can learn from it and how we can incorporate that even maybe.
And please share your findings so far as well, so we can understand.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's actually the next presentation is from Christy in 2 weeks, so she will talk about Tekton, and then Ramin, you also have a presentation upcoming week, so we will have a chance to see what is happening in Tekton as well.
Yes, in April, I believe. Yeah.
Good. In the end of the presentation, I just mentioned something about cloud events. You can read it afterwards. We have considered cloud events, but so far we haven't adopted it. We might going forward. Value stream mapping is also a related area that I have some comment on in the presentation here. And I
was just going to ask about cloud events.
But yeah. I understand that. So that's why I added.
By the way, what was the impetus for choosing the name for a very old and popular programming language, which I, from a lifetime ago, actually had some dealings with. What was the impetus for that?
I don't know, actually. I wasn't here around when the name
Oh, I
was
see.
was
Okay.
invented. So I actually don't know why it has the same name as the programming language. I know that that exists, and I don't know how old that is. But yeah,
Okay.
I don't know that history, actually. Okay, so here are the related articles in academia that have been published around this area, with Eiffel mentioned as well, in some extent. Yeah, that's it. And thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Emil. So we are already over time. If anyone has any question, we can go a few minutes over time. If not, I will get the slides from Emil, and I asked Dan where to put them. We will put the slides in CDF presentations repository, and then the link to slides will be included in Minute of Meetings. So if you are subscribed to SIG Interoperability mail list, you will get the minutes, and you will get the link to slides, which you can look at them offline. And as I noted, Christy will present Tecton on February 20th meeting. So please join to that one to see what's happening in Tecton as well. And yeah, Christy, you are going to say something?
No, I was just going to say thanks for the talk, and then also see you next time.
Yeah, ditto on that. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you.
And have a nice day, have a nice evening, wherever you are on this planet. Talk to you next time. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Thanks all.